Hello and welcome. I hope that you are doing well. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the box model, which is a model that's used by CSS in order to format HTML elements. So the box model follows an interesting set of principles related to how elements are positioned on the page. And the general idea of the box model is that it dictates how much space an element is given, and the different formatting that we can apply based on the position of the content. So you can see that it sort of goes in a set of layers, right? So the content is the innermost layer, and then we have padding, border, and margin. I'll start with border because border is one that we've seen already. With a border, it's essentially the part that is going to move, of course, all the way around the content, but it sits between the padding and the content, right? So it sits just above, rather, the padding and the content, right? So what that means is that when we set a border, the location where the border is being set still has some space between it and the content, known as the padding. So one of the things that you may have noticed is that when we added our border, it was actually quite squished up against the text, which was the actual content of the elements that we were working with. If we wanted to add more space between the content and the border, we can adjust the padding of the element. So the padding can be given, the same sort of properties as the border, right? We can give it like, a certain number of pixels, and it will give us that space between it and the border. And then similarly, we have the margin, which sits between the border and anything else that exists on our page, right? So it gives us space, between this element and other elements on the page. So this is how we can actually interact with the spacing between various different elements. So this might be maybe a little bit confusing, but I'm going to demonstrate it here for you with our table elements that we had in our previous video. So let's move over to our HTML here. And you can see that, for instance, we set our border, right? So we have our border here that exists. And what I've done here is I've actually added in some padding. And what I want to do is I want to show you what the difference between having the padding there and not having the padding there is. So first, let's remove the padding. Let's just see what happens. So without the padding, what we have is we have the following. So move this over. We have this, right? You see that everything is very squished together, right? Now, if I add in the padding, right, of say 5 pixels, watch what happens. So take a good look at what it looks like now. Do you see how with the padding, things got larger, essentially, right? Basically, all that's happening here is the border is given more space to the content, right? So the lines for the borders are not hugging as closely to the content. They have a lot more space because the padding is moving that border out more. So that's the general way that this padding is working. And you can put in like really large numbers to get a better understanding, right? We can make this like 10 pixels, for instance. It'll be very clear what's happening, right? You can see it gets even more expanded, right? So you can see generally that's the way that padding is being adjusted. So that's what padding is doing for us. Now, similarly, we could take a look at some of the other components that we had available to us, right? So when we come back here, we had the margin as well, right? Let me show you what the margin actually does, because we can see that the border is sitting, with the lines, right? We can see where that's sitting with the lines, but the margin might not be quite as clear. Let me add in a 10 pixel margin, and let me show you what that looks like. So here it is before, here it is after. Do you see how there's more space between this table here and this table here now? That is what our margin is doing. It's giving us space between the elements. So I guess to summarize really the idea of what our different models of the box, or the different box model components are doing, basically the padding is going to tell us the distance between the content and the border. The border sits in the middle, right? And then we have our margin, which tells us the distance between different elements in our HTML document. So this should hopefully help you be a bit more familiar with the box model. I really encourage you to try out different things with this, try experimenting with it. It's a little bit tricky to understand just by looking at the pictures. It's something that you really have to dive in and give a lot of thought to, right? Once you get a good handle on this, though, you'll be able to adjust elements around the screen quite easily because you'll understand where each of the different components are adjusting. So that's everything for this video, and that's also everything for this section. Thank you very much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this section of our videos. In the next section, we're going to jump into Bootstrap, which is a utility that allows us to format HTML and CSS quicker, right? It has some built-in formatting that will allow us to be able to create really nice looking web pages without having to know a huge amount of the CSS. It will help us sort of maneuver around all of these with pre-configured web pages. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.